Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment today. Breaking overnight train wreck. At least 23 people dead, dozens more injured after a metro train overpass gave way in Mexico City. We'll bring you the latest on how it happened and the desperate search for survivors. Damage control. A frightening system of severe weather ripped through parts of the South on Monday, with multiple tornadoes touching down across Mississippi and Georgia. A look at the damage this morning as the region braces for another possible round of storms. End of an era. America's first couple of big tech, Bill and Melinda Gates, announcing an end to their marriage after 27 years. The reason behind the top dollar split and what the future holds for their global foundation. And daring rescue. A 2-year-old girl pulled to safety by a stranger after a harrowing car wreck in Maryland, with dramatic footage of a bystander leaping into action. We begin with the urgent search and rescue mission underway in Mexico City after a metro train overpass collapsed late last night. The accident left train cars hanging from the crumpled debris. The city's mayor says at least 23 people were killed, with dozens more injured. NBC News correspondent Gadi Schwartz joins us now with the latest developments. So, Gadi, can you walk us through what happened here, and are officials saying anything about how this accident might have happened?
Hey, good morning, Joe. Yeah, an absolutely horrific tragedy. Rescue crews are still there on site after what looks like a support beam for that subway collapse, sending that metro train down onto traffic below. Right now, we know at least 23 people were killed. 65 people were taken to local hospitals, and at least 7 people are in critical condition. Among those, many victims are small children, as well as people who were trapped in their cars by the crushing subway that fell from above. At one point, a man was extracted alive after a crane was used to literally lift the subway car off of his car so he could be pulled to safety. The mayor of Mexico City said what happened today in the metro is a terrible tragedy. Quote, "My solidarity with the victims and their families," and added that it is too soon to tell what caused the collapse. But a local reporting from El Universal, which is one of the largest newspapers in Mexico City, has documented problems with some of the concrete metro overpasses dating back to that powerful earthquake that rocked Mexico City in 2017. Again, Joe, the investigation is just beginning, and the mayor is pledging to do whatever it takes, use whatever resources necessary to get to the bottom of what happened last night.
Gadi, I know we're hearing from witnesses. How are they describing how this all unfolded?
We're hearing from witnesses, and we're also seeing some video firsthand. There's some surveillance video that shows what happens, and it happens in a matter of seconds. You see the metro train speeding by, looking like it's going at a normal clip, and then all of a sudden you see some dust from concrete, and then the next thing you know, that train is down on the traffic below. It happens again in a matter of seconds, and then from there, it was all a rescue situation. People running from all over that area to try to pull people from the debris. But as we said a little bit earlier, 23 people have died.
And Gadi, is this still a rescue operation? Are there still survivors they're trying to rescue?
It's unclear. There's some local reporting saying that, yes, there are still active search and rescue operations underway. But then there are also some other tweets from authorities that say that they have accounted for everybody that was possibly missing or has been hospitalized at this point. So still a little bit of conflicting information, but we're hoping to have an update pretty soon. Joe?
Just a tragic scene in Mexico City this morning. Gadi Schwartz, thank you so much. Now to welcome signs of progress in the battle against coronavirus. Some of the country's earliest hotspots, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, will now fully reopen in a little over 2 weeks, with plans to lift most of their capacity restrictions. That progress comes with a new concern from health experts that the U.S. may never reach herd immunity. More than half of American adults have had at least one dose of a COVID vaccine, but a recent poll shows about 30% of Americans say they won't get vaccinated, making that herd immunity threshold of 70 to 80% much more challenging. Still, President Biden remains hopeful that the U.S. will get there.
I think by the end of the summer, we'll be in a very different position than we are now. My plea to everyone, get vaccinated now, please.
NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez joins me live. So, Isa, President Biden hopes things will mostly get back to normal by summer, but for some parts of the country, that could come much sooner. What more can you tell us about these reopening plans for New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut?
Good morning, Joe. So, May 19th. That's the big date when these three states are going to be reopening many of their businesses fully. So we're talking about restaurants, offices, barbershops, theaters, museums, amusement parks, gyms, and fitness centers. This is, like you said, major news for an area, a region that was the center of the coronavirus pandemic for a while there. Now, in New York City, Governor Cuomo also announced that the subway will be fully reopening as well. Take a listen.
We're going to coordinate the MTA's resumption of 24-hour service with the reopening and immediately with the curfew lift. The curfew lift will apply to restaurants, bars, etc. Especially in Manhattan. Workers are going to need to get back and forth.
About 80,000 city workers in New York City have also already begun to return to their offices. Joe?
Now, Isa, the New York Times is reporting that the FDA plans to authorize the Pfizer vaccine for kids 12 to 15. What's the timeline on that?
Joe, we could see this by early next week, even as early as late this week, according to the New York Times report, which cites federal officials who are familiar with the agency's planning. Now, this is welcome news for the vaccine rollout, but also for many parents who have been concerned and hoping to get their kids vaccinated and protected, especially going into the summer, which we know is a busy season of activities and summer camps for kids, but also going into the new school year in the late summer and early fall. Now, we know, like you mentioned earlier, that many people are still hesitant. Adults are still hesitant to get their COVID shots here in the U.S. So we expect that, many more people, many parents will also be hesitant for their children to get vaccinated, which is something that policymakers who have been pushing for people to get vaccinated so that we can get to that herd immunity. That's a challenge that they'll have to face moving forward as well. Joe?
Anissa, I want to ask you about something the CDC just said. Thousands of COVID vaccines are going to waste. Why is that? Do we know what's behind this?
Joe, so right now we don't know the why behind, the reason this is happening. However, what we do know is that as of late March, so about 3 months into the vaccine rollout here in the U.S., CDC data shows that over 180,000 vaccine doses were wasted, were discarded. Now, the interesting thing about this is that based on this data, we're seeing that CVS pharmacies are responsible for about 50% of these wasted COVID shots, and Walgreens pharmacies are responsible for about 20% of those wasted shots. Now, again, we're not sure why this is the case right now based on the data, but some critics have said that early on in the rollout, the Trump administration relied too heavily on these pharmacies, particularly in their long-term vaccination program. Early on when we were hearing about these pharmacies being involved in the vaccination of, staff and residents in these long-term care facilities. When asked about this, CVS Pharmacy did say that the majority of these shots that have been wasted, by them in their vaccination processes were during that particular time in the rollout. Haven't heard from Walgreens on this, but that's what we're learning so far. Joe?
All right. Isa Gutierrez, thank you so much. Let's bring in Dr. Bob Lahita. He's the director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. Dr. Lahita, always good to have you with us. Let's start by talking about herd immunity. Several health experts told the New York Times that the U.S. won't be able to eradicate the virus, that it will likely be a manageable threat. Do you agree with that? And kind of explain to us what this manageable threat would look like.
Yes, I do agree with that. And first of all, let me explain for your viewers what herd immunity is, Joe. Herd immunity is where the infections or the vaccinations reach a certain threshold. It's generally thought to be between 70 and 80%. Now, we're having problems achieving that because of the 30% of the population that do not want to be vaccinated out of either fear or inaccessibility. Now, we've just heard from Issa that accessibility doesn't seem to be a problem, except perhaps in the very rural areas. And so people just don't want to or are afraid of being vaccinated, which is what our big problem is. And now with the variants we have, the infectivity has increased. So we're going to see going forward a small segment of the population that will continue to be infected. And some, God forbid, will be very, very sick and perhaps even die. Now, that is a real problem. There are, Joe, around the area, particularly in the New York area, pockets where people are less vaccinated than in other areas. And they may be the areas where people are crowded together and don't have access, say, to pharmacies or to clinics where they can be vaccinated. And so we're looking at future possibilities going forward, Joe, and getting this vaccine available to people out there.
So if COVID is going to be this manageable threat, we need to be able to treat those who get it. Where do we stand on that? Will we soon maybe see treatments similar to how doctors treat the seasonal flu?
Yeah, well, Joe, the issue with the flu is that we have the vaccine, which is in some places mandated, particularly in hospitals and healthcare facilities. We haven't done that yet with COVID-19. We are looking forward to possibly making this mandatory in some institutions, certainly in hospitals, clinics, and perhaps nursing homes. So, yeah, going forward, I'm seeing still the development of vaccines. Like there are 277 vaccines that are still in development. And the good news is here that there are a number of vaccines, and this happened with polio back in the day when Sabin developed an oral polio vaccine. We would like to see an oral COVID-19 vaccine. There are 2 being evaluated and 7 nasal vaccines being vaccinated, meaning going into the nose. So people who are afraid of getting the shot, they will not have an excuse anymore. As far as our drugs go, we're back to remdesivir and other drugs like dexamethasone in the hospital for the severely ill people.
And Dr. Lahita, let's talk about some of the good news in our neck of the woods. We're seeing a lot of reopenings, including where you are in New Jersey, where I am in New York. Most restrictions will be lifted on May 19th. Do you think that's too soon, or do you agree with that decision?
I agree with that decision. We need to lift the lockdowns, especially for those of us who have been vaccinated. Everybody still wears masks to restaurants and other places, which is advised. When you're in a closed space and you don't know whether the guy or lady sitting next to you has been vaccinated or possibly could even be infected, it's best to continue to wear your mask and to mitigate. However, I really do think we should ease the restrictions. I'm around people who are vaccinated all day, and we still continue to wear our masks out of habit. But it's going to be important to know that outdoors, you don't have to wear your mask. And indoors, if you're in a public place, you probably should wear your mask to prevent infecting people or being infected yourself, even though you have the vaccine. It's very, very important, Joe.
As always, great advice from Dr. Bob Lahita. Good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Good to see you.
The South is bracing for another round of severe storms today. This as the cleanup gets underway after a series of severe storms and tornadoes swept across the area yesterday. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander joins us now from Atlanta with a look at the damage. Blaine, good morning.
Well, Joe, good morning to you. The storms have already clearly left their mark here across metro Atlanta. We're just south of the city, but you're already seeing what came of yesterday. This is just a quick look at this industrial complex. You kind of see right here some of the damage. And then if we look over here, we see that the roof of this complex has really been just ripped off and left in a pile over here. Now, unfortunately, we know that this is not necessarily the end, as millions around the South are bracing for a potential round 2.
Across the South, sounds of an unforgiving storm. I just heard woo, 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 and then I heard boom, 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 boom.
A powerful system producing at least 4 tornadoes from Mississippi to Georgia. In Tupelo, an EF1 tore a 12-mile path through the city. Across the state, more heavy winds, tossing trucks like toys.
I looked out there and the trailer was behind me, but it was in front of me when it started.
Dangerous weather also slamming parts of Texas. This tornado spotted south of Fort Worth, while overnight multiple semi-trucks were blown off the highway near Dallas.
We've been stuck here for like 2 hours.
In West Georgia, the storm turned deadly, claiming the life of a restaurant owner before barreling toward Metro Atlanta, a rare head-on hit for the heavily populated city, toppling trees and ripping the roof from this industrial complex. In this Southwest community, neighbors had just moments to scramble to safety, including Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms.
Got up and I went to the back of the house and I looked at the trees and I thought, I've never seen that before. They were bent sideways.
In your backyard?
In my backyard.
She immediately started checking on her neighbors, all stunned the damage was not worse.
There's one tree a few doors down. Had it fallen onto my neighbor's home, I would venture to say that house would be gone, and if anyone was in it, they'd be dead.
And Joe, today, officials from the National Weather Service are going to be here on the ground in Metro Atlanta surveying the damage. This is going to be what they're looking at when you kind of look at the damage of trees. But again, unfortunately, there are still some 28 million people possibly in the path as another round of storms is set to blow through later today. Joe.
All right, Blaine, thank you so much. And with more severe weather in the forecast, let's get a check on your morning news now weather. Bill Cairns is with us. Hey there, Bill. Good morning.
Hey, good morning to you, Joe. Active, as you just saw the picture, from all over the place. And here's a map that kind of represents that. Each of these dots shows you where we have what we call a storm report. So if there's a tornado that's witnessed, you get a little icon for it. And this was one of them yesterday. This was in Bloom, Texas. Kind of an interesting looking tornado, right? Doesn't even look like it was spinning all that fast. Not all of them do. Kind of just like a finger sticking down out of the clouds there, for just an interesting little shape. A little cone tornado, we'd call that one. So let's get back to the maps. And 230 storm reports. Each of these dots shows you where the blue is a wind damage report. The white is a hail report. I mean, I saw a picture near San Antonio of like a softball type hailstone in someone's hand. There was some monster hail around San Antonio, and we still have some strong storms even at this hour. Right now in Nashville, there's a tornado warning just north of the city, a severe thunderstorm warning for Nashville itself, and some very strong winds are rolling through the city. Could get some power outages in central Tennessee from this, and a lot of heavy rain and flood potential in Kentucky. So here's the map for today. The areas most at risk: Mississippi and Alabama. This is the same spots that were hit 2 days ago from 24 tornadoes. We're going to see numerous tornadoes once again this afternoon. A few of those possible even in areas of Louisiana. And eventually this line of storms will roll through Atlanta. And on top of that, it's been raining day after day. We could see another 4 to 6 inches. We have a flood watch that's up for areas of Tennessee, also northern portions of Georgia. And we could get up to 4 to 6 inches there in central Alabama and Mississippi. So kind of a potpourri of weather today on this map. 92 in Tampa, 50s in Minnesota, and a lot of nasty stuff in the middle there, Joe. We will expect to see, just like we did today, numerous pictures of more damage later on.
All right. Thanks for keeping us updated, Bill. Appreciate it. The Biden administration announced Monday it will raise the number of refugees admitted to the United States this year. This reversal comes 2 weeks after the president faced criticism from fellow Democrats for his initial decision to keep Trump-era limits. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now. So, Mike, tell us, where will the refugee cap stand now, and what's behind this change?
Yeah, Joe, as you mentioned, it was only a few weeks ago when this administration sparked a lot of confusion and some backlash by announcing it was going to keep its refugee cap at the Trump-era level of 15,000, announcing yesterday it was indeed going to raise it to what it said it was going to do in February, 62,500 for this fiscal year, with the goal of doubling that to 125,000 for the next fiscal year. The president, in a statement, saying it's important to take this action today to remove any lingering doubt in the minds of refugees around the world. world. Also, though, acknowledging that even with this higher cap, it's unlikely that the U.S. is going to admit that many refugees this year or even next year. The administration continuing to blame the strain on the system put on the Trump administration by the fact that they dismantled so much of our immigration and refugee admissions process. Of course, also the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border, also to blame in straining U.S. resources as well, Joe.
Mike, I also want to ask you about what's happening in Congress with Representative Liz Cheney. The Republican tweeted yesterday that former President Trump is, quote, poisoning our democratic system. She's been doubling down on her criticisms of the former president. How is she being viewed right now within the Republican Party? Is she still not getting much support? And what does this mean for her future?
Yeah, that tweet from Liz Cheney came just within an hour of the former president releasing a statement saying that the 2020 election itself was, as he put it, the big lie, continuing to double down. He is, of course, on those unfounded conspiracies about the vote count. Now, remember when Liz Cheney voted to impeach the president, she faced a vote in her House caucus to keep her leadership position. She survived that vote. But the longer she continues to be so outspoken, the more strain it's putting on her. There's growing calls from within the Republican conference to remove her from this leadership position. It's unclear what the mechanism would be in order to remove her, but they could force this if there's enough of a groundswell within the conference. They don't like this dissension. They don't like her being so outspoken in her criticism of the former president.
And Mike, finally, I'll ask you about the Bidens visiting former President Carter and his wife Rosalind in Georgia last Thursday. The Carter Center has now released a photo of the visit. Do you have any more details about their time together?
Yeah, this photo certainly got a lot of attention on Twitter last night, looking at perhaps the perspective, the dimensions there by the way the photo was taken. Looks like the Bidens are much bigger than the Carters. Of course, this visit took place last Thursday, the day after the president's speech to Congress when he went down to Georgia. It was so interesting to just learn over the weekend that he was the first president to spend any time with the Carters at their hometown there in Plains, Georgia. A sign of respect from Joe Biden, who actually endorsed President Carter when he ran for president the first time in 1976. In fact, Biden, who was then himself a young senator, only 33 years old, was the first U.S. senator to endorse the now former president. He stuck with him in that tough primary in 1980. So long ties between these two that we see in that picture there, Joe.
I think that's what happens when people take photos when someone's in a chair and someone's not in a chair. I don't know. lots of dissection going on with that picture there. Mike, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Coming up, big tech's power couple, Bill and Melinda Gates, are a couple no more. Why one of the world's wealthiest duos is calling it quits. Next. One of the world's wealthiest couples is calling it quits after 27 years of marriage. Bill and Melinda Gates released a pair of matching statements yesterday, saying in part, after a great deal of thought and a lot of work on our relationship, we've made the decision to end our marriage. Forbes estimates that Bill Gates is worth nearly $130 billion, making him the fourth richest person in the world. NBC News senior media reporter Dylan Byers joins us now with more on the surprising split. So, Dylan, Bill and Melinda Gates are known for their global charity, the Gates Foundation. It's worth an estimated $50 billion. What do you know about their plans moving forward now for the organization?
Yeah, well, the statement from both Bill and Melinda Gates, as well as the statement that we got from the foundation itself, is that all things will continue as normal, that they will, continue to participate together in the foundation. They will continue their charitable giving, and they will continue to fight for the causes that they have fought for a long time: global development, education, climate change more recently, and of course, most recently, battling the COVID-19 pandemic. I would say, nevertheless, when you were talking about people who carry their weight and that influence in the philanthropic community, and who have the power to affect so much change on a global level, there are still concerns and questions about exactly what's going to happen when all of a sudden that vast amount of wealth is split, and when obviously there have been very personal reasons for ending this 27-year marriage and what sort of effect that might have on philanthropy. But for now, taking them at their word, the foundation will continue as it has for several years.
You know, Dylan, I think journalists were quick to look over recent interviews with both Bill and Melinda Gates to see if they said anything about their marriage recently. I know Melinda has talked recently with reporters about women's equality, which is a huge focus for her. Has she said anything about their marriage in recent months?
Yeah, she has. And in fact, she's spoken to our own Stephanie Rule about that. I think we probably have some interview that we can go to.
Both people can set the table and both people can do the microwaving and the cleaning up. And so we're trying to, again, continue to role model that in our house.
So look, I think what she's saying effectively is they have done so much at the sort of public level in terms of trying to improve lives for everybody, but that when you think about the amount of work that they've poured in to their own professions and to their charitable giving, there has been a strain on the marriage. She's spoken about that strain on the marriage, and she's spoken about the need for greater equity in the marriage. That is something that even played a role in Bill Gates' decision to step down from the boards of both, from the board of Microsoft and from Berkshire Hathaway just last year. Clearly, it seems like that wasn't enough.
Yeah, and we should note there, we know that Melinda has spoken with Stephanie Rule. That clip there we played was with Savannah Guthrie. Dylan, I also want to ask you, one of the other richest men in the world, Jeff Bezos, divorced from his wife just a couple of years ago. Does that offer any sort of model for a high-profile split like this, or is there no template at all for something like this?
Well, look, when you're talking about something so personal, obviously everything is different. At the same time, you do have a template there in terms of what happens when an incredibly large sum of money that has been shared by a couple is now split between a couple. And all of a sudden we saw Mackenzie Bezos basically skyrocket to become one of the wealthiest women in the world, and to have sort of, in her pocket a great deal of influence, particularly philanthropy. I think we're going to see the same thing here. I think the difference is that for so long, both Bill and Melinda Gates have been involved in philanthropy, and they're not strangers to this game.
All right, Dylan Byers, appreciate your reporting and your expertise this morning. Thank you so much. In North Carolina, friends, family, and civil rights activists came together for the funeral of Andrew Brown Jr. The service came 2 weeks after Brown was shot and killed by sheriff's deputies during an attempt to arrest him for felony drug charges. Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy, calling for justice and the release of body cam video in Brown's death.
Andrew Brown Jr., if he did wrong, bring him to court. But you don't have the right to bring him to his funeral.
NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Elizabeth City there in North Carolina. So, Priscilla, you were there for yesterday's services. Tell us more about the funeral and how Andrew Brown is being remembered.
Well, Joe, good morning. A very somber mood on the ground here yesterday as those funeral services were taking place. We saw Reverend Al Sharpton deliver that eulogy, and he told everyone not to confuse this celebration of life with the continued demand for justice. And we certainly heard that peppered into those services, even as folks were remembering Andrew Brown Jr. and talking about his life. Attorney Ben Crump stood up and gave a speech, and he told everyone there that they needed to continue to fight for Brown Jr.'s constitutional rights, continue to fight for justice, even though he was not here to do that himself. We also heard from a number of Brown Jr.'s family members who spoke, including his oldest son, Khalil. And take a listen to what he had to say about the outpouring of love and support for this family.
It's a terrible way we had to be together like this, but seeing everybody, I'm glad we're together like this right now.
And they did release doves at the end of that service, 1 dove for Andrew Brown Jr.'s soul and 7 others for each of his children. Joe?
Priscilla, Brown was killed within 24 hours of the conviction of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. George Floyd's family was actually there in North Carolina yesterday. What was their message to Brown's family?
Yeah, Joe, a number of family members who have lost loved ones at the hands of police were in attendance yesterday to stand in solidarity with this family. We saw Gwen Carr there, the mother of Eric Garner, and also members of Dante Wright's family, who, as a reminder, was killed during the Derek Chauvin trial in Minnesota just a few weeks ago. And also, of course, George Floyd's family there. We spoke with Terrence Floyd, George Floyd's brother. Take a listen to what he said that he wanted to say to this family.
Shame in America that us as black men, we gotta duck and dodge death when it's not even looking at us. I just want to let y'all know, man, we there for y'all. We connected.
And that really was a theme of the entire service, is a need to stay connected, to stay around this family and continue to demand justice and transparency. Joe?
And Priscilla, we mentioned that Reverend Sharpton and many others are calling for body camera footage of Brown's killing. Where do things stand with that right now?
Right. So we know that the family has been able, or some members of the family were able to watch a 20-second clip of what happened. And we expect that they are going to see the rest of that body cam footage by the end of this week per a judge's order. However, it's unclear to what extent that body cam footage will be redacted. But many people here are saying that that is not enough. They would like to see all of that body cam footage released to the public so that everyone can see it. So even as these services are over and Brown has been laid to rest, still a lot of unanswered questions and much more to this story. Joe?
Absolutely. Priscilla Thompson, we know you'll stay on top of it. Thank you so much. The killings of Andrew Brown Jr., George Floyd, and other people of color by law enforcement have become a key issue in the race for Virginia's next attorney general. This year, two-term incumbent Mark Herring is being challenged by Jay Jones in an election that could signal an even bigger political movement next year. NBC News political reporter Vaughn Hilliard joins me now from Alexandria, Virginia. So, Vaughn, first of all, tell us, who are these two candidates and how are the recent police killings, the protests, the trials like the Chauvin trial helping to define the race for Virginia's next AG?
Yeah, Joe, like Priscilla, I was in Elizabeth City over the weekend here. When you go from each of these communities, you constantly hear those pleas of change, of needing action. And where does that go? Well, the ballot box is one of those places, and that's what led us here to this race. You have a two-term incumbent, Mark Herring, a white attorney general who has represented the state of Virginia, a Democrat, but he is being challenged as he's going for that third term against a 32-year-old black man, a delegate from the Virginia House out of Norfolk, Jay Jones. I was able to have the chance to talk with both of them over the weekend about this race, because this is where that tension meets within the Democratic Party. You have a white attorney general who has said he has fought for progressive change, fought for action, but then a young black trial lawyer who says we need somebody who actually understands and represents our communities, and that time for change is now. Take a listen to part of our conversations.
We are in a moment, and I think everybody understands that we have challenging times ahead, and we need leaders whose voices have often been lost, forgotten, or left behind at the table with new ideas, fresh perspectives, and these different faces that reflect the Virginia of right now. It's about looking forward. It's not about looking back. It's about being proactive and not reactive.
I've been taking a progressive, forward-looking stand, and the difference now in Virginia is amazing, that we've made this much progress, and we've got a lot more that we can do on from protecting health care and reproductive rights to criminal justice reform to the environment. And that's why I'm asking for voters' support again to make sure that we build on all that progress.
Now, it's part of that tension, actually, the governor, Ralph Northam, who became quite famous nationally when photo came out allegedly showing him in blackface decades ago. Well, it was Mark Herring who, in those days later, he acknowledged that he at one time wore blackface as well, but making the claim that he has also tried to bring criminal justice issues and racial equity issues to the forefront of his time in the Attorney General's office. But Jay Jones, as you heard him say, this is not a time to have a reactive Attorney General, but one who is proactive.
Now, Vaughn, the issue of police brutality could also affect the ballot box next year. Let's have you take out your crystal ball here. What are the races to watch in 2022?
No, that's a good question here because Virginia, they vote in off years, along with New Jersey. They vote in the off years. So their elections are here in 2021. This primary we're talking about is just 1 month from now. And so this could be a preview of other races to come in 2022. We saw last year, now Congresswoman Cori Bush rise up in Missouri. She was one time an activist, a protester on the front lines in Ferguson, Missouri, ultimately mounted a run against another Democratic incumbent to become Congresswoman. And those protests following the killing of George Floyd, those happened last summer before folks could really, or after folks could really put their name on the ballot for the 2020 election. So that's why, again, we were drawn to this Virginia Attorney General's race, because after a year of racial reckoning, you saw 32-year-old Jay Jones say he's going to run and mount a challenge against this incumbent Democrat. And is there potentially other races across the country like this one that we see heading into 2022, Joe?
All right. Very interesting, Vaughn. Thank you for taking a look at that specific race. Appreciate it. Coming up, a, quote, out-of-control Chinese rocket is hurtling back down to Earth. Where it lands, nobody knows. That story next. A search is underway in upstate New York where a college student disappeared more than a week ago. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Goss spoke with the woman's family. They're offering a $10,000 reward for information about her disappearance.
It's been days since anyone has seen 19-year-old college student Sanaya Dennis, a sophomore at SUNY Buffalo in New York State.
We are treating this investigation as critically important and as if it was a member of our family or my daughter who was missing.
Police released this photo of the computer engineering major leaving her dorm at 11 p.m. on April 24th. They also say there is video of her at a bus station later that night, possibly on her way to Goat Island in Niagara Falls State Park, the last place her cell phone was detected, roughly 20 miles from the school. Late last week, the family voiced frustration with the pace of the investigation.
There's a lot that we're dissatisfied with behind these cameras.
My family is very distraught. Everybody's emotions are out of whack. We only know that we want my sister back.
Police searched Niagara Falls Park with dogs and a helicopter. The family is offering a $10,000 reward.
All of this is just really baffling. I thought, talk about worst nightmare. People watch these crime shows. I'm living this.
Knowing nothing, with the fear only growing. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, New York.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is meeting foreign ministers from some of the world's leading economies in London today for a G7 meeting. They're discussing ways to tackle global threats by working together. The Secretary of State has also been talking about two world powers that are not part of the G7, Russia and China. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from London. So, Matt, Secretary Blinken says the U.S. wants a more stable relationship with Russia. Here's what he had to say about that.
We are focused very much on Russia's actions and what course it chooses to take. But we're not looking to escalate. We would prefer to have a more stable, more predictable relationship. And if Russia moves in that direction, so will we.
So, Matt, how is this diplomatic approach being received at the G7?
Well, that's hard to tell exactly. I mean, we just started, really, and there's going to be a lot of different meetings covering a lot of different areas. You know, Russia is only one part of this. Each meeting with all these other foreign ministers, it's only going to be a couple of minutes, maybe even 30 minutes. It's really quite a quick, almost a speed dating kind of arrangement. But when we're talking about Russia, everybody's in agreement. Remember that it was only a little while ago that this G7 used to be called the G8 because Russia was part of it. And it was only when Russia invaded Crimea and destabilized eastern Ukraine, that's when they got kicked out, and the G7 became the G7. But Russia is still a very large economy. It's very influential. And Blinken and the Biden administration is going to be running into a lot of problems when it comes to dealing with Europe on Russia, because Europe is drifting slightly away from the U.S. position on Russia, and that's because of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They were relying on Russia for gas energy, and the Blinken's office and the Biden administration, they're going to have to decide whether or not they're going to try to basically obstruct this issue, whether they're going to try to effectively keep the Europeans from buying a lot of gas from Russia, or whether or not they're going to allow for that kind of cross-border trade and a new pipeline. That is going to be a thorny issue for these talks. Go.
Matt, Secretary of State Blinken also spoke about relations between the U.S. and China. What did he have to say about that?
Well, here's what he had to say. I mean, really, when we're talking about China, we're talking about one of the goals of the G7, which is to try to uphold the rules-based international order that the Trump administration kind of walked away from, while at the same time putting leaders like China's leader and Russia's leader on notice. Now, basically, restoring the rules-based order would mean confronting autocrats and those who would try to weaken the West in the face of a multipolar world. And that is what Blinken has been trying to do. Here's what he said about China.
It is not our purpose to try to contain China or to hold China down. What we are trying to do is to uphold the international rules-based order that our countries have invested so much in over so many decades, to the benefit, I would argue, not just of our own citizens, but of people around the world, including, by the way, China.
So this is an interesting one because, of course, the Biden administration is trying to differentiate themselves from Trump. China and Xi Jinping, its leader, was one of Trump's favorite punching bags on the global stage. But the Biden administration, in fact, their policies toward China aren't necessarily all that different from the Trump administration's, but they're trying to reset the tone. They're trying to create a new style of diplomacy. And that's what we're seeing at the G7 here in London this week. Joe?
And Matt, real quickly, this is the first G7 meeting of the Biden administration. How will the Secretary of State try to reset the tone when it comes to American diplomacy?
Well, it's not only that, it's the first meeting of these G7 foreign ministers in about 2 years. Now, what's changed since then? In the past 2 years, two really, really big things: a global pandemic and the departure of President Donald Trump. Now, both of those things have really driven home to the leaders of the G7. And again, this is a talk shop that's all about the international rules-based order, as you just heard from Anthony Blinken himself. So when we're talking about the rules-based international order, that is something that Donald Trump and his administration really singularly focused on actually destroying. They made it very public. And so this is what this administration is going to be trying to do on the international stage, trying to repair the plumbing that just lines global diplomacy. Joe?
All right, Matt Bradley, thank you so much. And let's take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us from Beijing with more. Hey, Janice, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. It's really coming down to the wire in Israel for Benjamin Netanyahu as he's trying to get together a government after failing to win a majority in elections in March, the fourth inconclusive election in just 2 years. The deal that he has offered to his rival, Naftali Bennett, is that he would offer the leadership of the country for 1 year if Bennett agrees to form a coalition with him, which is strange because Bennett won only 7 of 120 seats. So far, Bennett seems to have rejected this idea of a rotating premiership, but Netanyahu is trying to do what he can to extend his 12 years in power. Remember, he is also now facing corruption charges. He has until midnight tonight to form a government. Otherwise, Israel will be headed to an unprecedented 5th election by August. Mexico's president has apologized to the indigenous Mayan people for abuses committed against them over the 5 centuries since the Spanish conquest. Andrés Manuel López Obrador acknowledged colonial domination and what he called terrible abuses, an historic admission. This is also a milestone for Mayan leaders who have pushed for greater recognition of the thousands of people who were killed and had their culture eradicated. However, there is some skepticism about the timing of this official apology, though, with just 1 month to go before crucial legislative and municipal elections in Mexico. And finally, Joe, a heads up, really, heads up. There's a Chinese rocket that is falling back to Earth, and it will make an uncontrolled re-entry at a crash site that at this point is unknown. It is the 100-foot-high core of the rocket that launched China's first module for the space station that it's building. This core is now orbiting the Earth about every 90 minutes at an altitude of 200 miles, going roughly 17,000 miles per hour. So experts expect that parts of it will burn up, but some parts of it could re-enter the Earth. Where will it land? That's the golden question. Experts figure it could be as far north as New York, Madrid, Beijing, or as far south as Wellington or southern Chile, or anywhere in between.
Wow.
So this is a good time to remember that 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water, so there is a very strong chance that this debris will be scattered at sea. But this is your FYI for the day.
There's also a chance it could land on land, and that would not be great. All right, Janice, thank you for that comforting note. Appreciate it.
In the words of one expert, they said it's very bad.
Yeah. All right. It sounds like it. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that one. All right. Thank you, Janice. Coming up, our week-long series spotlighting female business owners and working women. On deck, Pinky Cole and Slutty Vegan, her plant-based brick-and-mortar turned national phenomenon. That's next. With only a few weeks to go until Memorial Day, some seasonal supplies like clothing, fireworks, and food for those barbecues, they might be in short supply this year. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Rule tells us what you need to know.
Joe, summer will be here before we know it, but already some of our favorite summer staples are getting more expensive and harder to find, from hot dogs to T-shirts, even fireworks.
Memorial Day is just around the corner, but getting those seasonal essentials may be a little tougher this year. Many summertime staples are in short supply, driving up the cost of items like poultry, pork, even ketchup.
So part of the reason we're seeing higher prices than the grocery store is because we have higher prices at the farm.
But it's not just food. Getting your hands on summer clothing like T-shirts and swimwear, even fireworks, could get tricky, with imports for both down from last year. Looking to get away on a road trip? Expect to see gas prices rise this summer, up 34% higher than where they were last year. Or opting to be poolside at home? Prices on chlorine tablets have doubled in some areas and could spike up to 70% over the next few months. So if you're not seeing what you want on store shelves, experts recommend shopping generic or store brands for a better price, asking local experts for help sourcing alternative items, and planning ahead to get the best deals possible.
Prices are expected to remain high for a bit, especially in meat and produce. And another factor, money. Between stimulus checks and record savings during the pandemic, people have money to spend, and that demand is pushing prices even higher. Joe?
All right. We've got a remarkable story to share with you this morning. A heroic rescue of a little girl after being thrown into a Maryland bay during a dramatic car crash. The rescuer, an anonymous bystander who did not hesitate to help. NBC News correspondent Garrett Hakes spoke with the family that helped bring the 2-year-old and the man who saved her to safety. He joins us now from Ocean City, Maryland. Garrett, what a story. Good morning.
Hey, Joe. Good morning. It is a story, really remarkable, and it all played out right behind me. This is the Route 90 bridge into Ocean City. That's where this crash occurred and where this man jumped more than 25 feet into the water below to save a little girl he didn't know. Then boaters racing to pull both of them safely out of the water.
Is there someone in the water?
A daring rescue on the bay.
Oh my God, does he have a baby?
After a 5-car collision caused this perilous scene. A pickup truck dangling dangerously on the edge of a bridge after ejecting a 2-year-old passenger still in her car seat into the bay below. A stranger leaping into the shallow waters to save her.
Ocean City, we got 2 in the water, 2 in the vehicle hanging off the bridge.
Joe and Elena Ortel were on their boat nearby. What'd you think when you saw that car hanging there?
At first, there's got to be someone in the water because there's no way that someone didn't fall out of that car.
And in a dramatic moment seen here, they pulled both the little girl and her rescuer on board and raced to paramedics on shore.
After everyone was secure, we zoomed there as fast as we could.
Yeah, we hightailed it. Thankfully, we know the waterways and we knew exactly where to go.
Did he say anything about why he jumped in?
He didn't say anything. He was just so shocked of what happened.
It was more about making sure that the baby was, safe and he was safe. he was in some tremendous shock himself.
The Good Samaritan has asked to remain anonymous.
It says a lot about some people's demeanor, just doing the right thing when you got to do it.
The crash sent 8 people in total to the hospital. All have now been released, including the little girl. A terrifying scene revealing the best in humanity.
What does it say to you about your community, about people in general, that everybody sprung into action here when it was necessary?
When the chips are down, people will come together to make the right choices.
And Joe, even that family who pulled them both out of the water don't know the name of the Good Samaritan. I know at least one other family here who would surely like to know and shake his hand and say thank you.
Absolutely. Maybe even if it's in private, that can happen at some point. We'll see. Garrett, great story. Thank you so much. It's Working Women's Week here on NBC News Now. We're profiling female entrepreneurs and experts. That's especially important right now. Women's labor participation fell to a 33-year low during the pandemic, prompting some economists to dub it a she-cession. But one Atlanta-based restaurant owner defied the odds, expanding her business during COVID and getting back in the process. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson has the story.
People would come with lawn chairs, with their computers. They would stand outside for 8 hours at a time just to patronize my business. And at that point, I realized that it was bigger than burgers and fries. I started Slutty Vegan August 2018. All the vegan restaurants in Atlanta closed at an early time. And I was really just solving a problem. I wanted something to eat.
With that, Pinky Cole began researching recipes and putting together a plan for a brand new vegan spot.
I had the ghost kitchen for about 2 months, and then I got kicked out. And I was placed with a challenge that I'm going to hold on to these customers or I'm going to lose them, and I wasn't willing to lose them. So I paid for a food truck.
A food truck that soon blossomed into a brick and mortar restaurant.
And on the day of my grand opening, I had about 1,200 people outside, and I couldn't believe it.
That's one of the things that I've been most struck by is that you do have lines out the door at your restaurants, and it's a lot of black folks.
Again, I'm in the heart of the South. These people want vegan food because they have fell in love with the experience. We're going to laugh with you. We're going to have loud music that speaks to the culture, and we do that intentionally. And by the time you walk out these doors and eat the food, you won't even realize that you have food that didn't compromise a dead animal, and that is the agenda.
Cole says the name has also played a role in her success.
It literally was a way to merge 2 most pleasurable experiences in the world, right? So that's sex and that's food. I wanted people to see vegan food in a different way, right? For years, people see vegan food as something just healthy, flavorless. I wanted to redefine it.
Then, little over a year and a half after opening, the whole world stopped.
There were so many decisions to make, right? As an entrepreneur, do I open? Do I close? Do I remain socially responsible? Do I listen to the governor? Do I listen to the mayor? I stopped down on my business for 2 weeks. I assessed the operation. I paid my employees during that time, and we put a plan in place.
And the business kept growing.
I've been able to open up 3 locations in the middle of a pandemic with lines still down the block. I've been able to partner with big businesses like Shake Shack and Possible Food, and I'm very grateful about that. I don't take that for granted because I understand that there's so many businesses that have not excelled through the pandemic.
I also want to talk about your philanthropic work.
I just like to help people. Like that to me feels better than money in the bank. I've seen my mother doing it growing up as a Jamaican woman, not having much, humble beginnings, but she would help anybody who needed help. Pinky Cole Foundation was really a way to bridge that generational wealth gap.
Through her foundation, Cole has helped pay tuition for 30 graduating seniors at Clark Atlanta University and helped provide scholarships to the children of Rayshard Brooks after he was fatally shot by a police officer in a Wendy's parking lot last summer. And that's just the start.
The community is who serves you, and the community is who supports you, especially when things like a pandemic happen. So it's my duty and obligation to make sure that I always give back to the community.
Was there ever a moment where you thought this might not work out?
Absolutely not. I'm a hustler. I saw how hard my mother worked. I've witnessed my father do over 20 years in prison. So, failure is not an option for me. Once upon a time, people in the South, black people, some black people especially, wouldn't eat vegan food, making it so normal, like a regular cheeseburger and fries. And in 50 years, the goal is to be able to save the world by having people eat less animals.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.